Hello, Lynn Watts here again with Wyatt the Wonder Dog Books. And so today, what I want to share with you is a couple of really good picture books to share with students, either individually, in a small group, perhaps even in a classroom lesson, whenever you're dealing with the topic of resilience after some sort of trauma. And of course, just to very quickly kind of identify some of the different things that we consider trauma, and I say this because sometimes we forget that trauma encompasses so many different things. But certainly it encompasses anytime there is some kind of natural disaster, which there has been a lot of recently, whether that's hurricanes, flooding, loss of home, perhaps even loss of life of a family member or someone that the student knows. It includes serious accidents or illness, as well as a lot of personal types of trauma that a child might have gone through if there was a divorce in the family or some sort of family separation. If there's any kind of domestic violence, if there's a family member who is in prison, for instance. Another source of trauma for students, abuse or neglect, of course, witnessing any kind of violence. All of these things come in under the category of trauma for students, and of course, obviously for adults as well. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of picture books that you might use to open that topic and begin talking about some sort of recovery from and coping skills for resilience when there is trauma involved. So the first one is this one, which is called After the Fall, and it's about Humpty Dumpty. And I will say, with today's students, you might have to teach them who is Humpty Dumpty. I'm not sure nursery rhymes are used very much today, but as you probably know, Humpty Dumpty was the egg that fell off the wall. And this is a really clever book because it talks about how difficult it was for, even though he was put back together technically, how there were still all kinds of lumps and bumps and scratches. And not only that, he was very much afraid to get back up on the wall. So there's a lot about his resistance to that, how he kind of missed being on the wall, but it was pretty scary for him. And then he has an idea and creates an paper airplane of sorts, and he's flying it up in the sky. And of course, as you might imagine, it lands up on the wall. And it's a very important, special airplane. He spent a lot of time putting it together. And the question becomes, is he going to actually climb up on the wall to try and retrieve that airplane? So very interesting story, and certainly one that is a great analogy for any kind of loss, trauma, that sort of thing, and the difficulties of going back into somewhat of a similar situation and trusting that you can survive. So, very good picture book. I really like this one, and it's written by Dan Santat, Santat. I probably didn't pronounce that right. Probably it's Santat. All right. After the Fall, how Humpty Dumpty got back up again. Another really good book that I would really recommend, and honestly, this is a good book for us as counselors to read and to take to heart. And this one is called The Rabbit Listened. It's written by Corey Doerfeld, Doerfeld. So in this story, it's about a little boy who builds a tower out of blocks, and he is very proud of the tower. He thinks he's done something very, very special. He's very proud of his tower. I'll show you a picture here. Get that in there. And then something happens that the tower gets knocked down out of nowhere, as it says. So it's totally unexpected. Things come crashing down. And then there are lots of other animals that come along and try to help. And so it goes through a lot of the different things that people often do when there is trauma or tragedy or something along those lines in someone's life. There's a chicken who encourages him to talk about it. He doesn't feel like talking about it. There's a bear who comes along and says, oh, you must be angry. You must express that anger. An elephant who comes along and tries to help him fix it. He doesn't really want to fix it. So it just goes on through all of the many different techniques that we as humans often use to try and help someone when we see that there's been a loss in their life. In the very end, as you might imagine, there's a rabbit who comes along, and that all that rabbit does is listen. And once he starts listening, and again, I'll show you some of the pictures. Once there is someone who comes along and does nothing but listen, he discovers that this little boy is willing at this point now to talk. And he is willing to express some of his feelings and his anger and so on. And then he moves on and builds not only a new tower, but what looks to be an even more involved and special and bigger tower. So honestly, two books that you could use over and over again. There's so much depth to them and so many different nuances that I think you could talk about, different ways to talk about them. It would be really easy to create a whole lesson around either one of those books. So I hope that you find that helpful as you work with students, either individually or in a small group or even in a classroom, and talking about overcoming obstacles in our lives and the resilience and the reserve that it takes. All right, so this is Lynn Watts again from Wyatt the Wonder Dog Books, and thanks so much for listening.